Welcome to our continuing series of Virtual Voices, focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Our speaker today is Marcelo Garcia, who is the founder of Wisdom Accelerator Organization, a nonprofit aiming at helping teenagers worldwide to become wiser faster. He is a board member of the United Nations ECOSOC NGO and a smart cities expert with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. He has participated in multi-stakeholder events such as the World Economic Forum in Davos since 2011 and is currently a former member of the WEF Top Link community. During the WEF week, he also hosts wisdomhousedavos.org and wisdomfilmfestival.org. He was elected as a Swiss chapter chair of the Explorers Club and is a fellow of the 3 Royal Societies. He has visited many exotic and times challenging destinations, having explored 125 countries so far and practicing several languages he's acquired during the way. Currently, he is heavily involved in the Ukrainian conflict, raising funds to donate emergency satellite internet equipment to civilian support locations on the front. His travel inspired him to set up his non-profit Broadlight organization, reflecting the 100 years of his family's history in the telecommunication industry. His other areas of interest are in the film industry, having attended the Cannes Film Festival for the last 20 years, and longevity and similar physical and mental resilience challenges. Over to you, Marcelo Garcia.
Oh, thanks so much, Dr. Durbak. I mean, it's a very long intro, so I apologize for the long reading stretch. Thank you so much for the invitation. Real pleasure to be here. I'm surprised in a very positive way by the number of people attending the sessions, because during COVID, that was pretty much the only option. But if you're here these days, it's because you're very much attracted by the message that is being broadcast. So congratulations on the work you've done so far. Very happy to be part of it. And I think that the best way and the most useful for the audience to spend the time is discussing how one thing leads into another, right? Because this is a very useful skill to have. And it's very much how I ended up creating the Wisdom Accelerator for Youth and what happened ever since. So the story starts, in fact, with a very sad note, which is when my father passed away in 2013, so close to 10 years now. And the transformation that you go through, especially as a man losing a father, is pretty hard, but that's the only benchmark that I have to compare. I don't know how women go through the same experience, but for me it was definitely a big shock. He was 83 years old, but his mother lived to 103, so we felt like we had been cheated out of 20 years of his life. And I started thinking, what should I do with mine, and how can I honor his memory? So the decision at that point in time was to create a nonprofit focused on telecommunications, because it was my professional background and still is. So I'm off to Barcelona next week for the Mobile World Congress, which is the largest event in the world related to this type of technologies. And back then I was trying to figure out, what can I do that will have an impact, is related to telecommunications, and no one else seems to be doing. So I created a Broadlights, a very interesting journey, because you have to study quite a bit in terms of how nonprofits work in Switzerland, choosing the type of nonprofit structure that you want to have. Is it an association, a foundation, or you want to have maybe a cooperative? I know that in the US, you can even be an LLC and be a nonprofit. So it takes quite a bit of time to make sure that before you establish this kind of structure, that you know what you're doing, because the choices once made sometimes are quite hard to change. And it was established as an association. It's linked to the United Nations. via Broadlights, I was invited to join lots of working groups with the International Telecommunications Union, which is based in Geneva, with the UN Economic Commission for Europe, which is the smart cities connection I have with the UN. And once you're in the system, you start getting invited to participate in many other activities. You listen what someone is saying about a totally different event. So I ended up joining very interesting gatherings, such as the CSTD, that the UNCTAD, the Trade and Development Agency of the UN organizes. It's a conference on science and technology for development. You meet incredibly interesting people, like those that invented the basic components of the internet. And that allows you to do more, do things more efficiently, help others as well, and eventually join forces in partnerships. So the original idea of Broadlights, which is how I got into the Swiss nonprofit world that led me into the Wisdom Accelerator, was to try to help locations where access to the internet is really difficult to get. With new technologies like satellites and others that are not so common. Most people have a cable coming into the home. With fiber or other technologies in some locations, that's really impossible. And almost 10 years after initially having this idea, now we have deployed solutions in the front lines in Ukraine. So in a place called the Kupiansk, close to Kharkiv. And we're working in partnership with the local municipality, and our equipment basically connects to their solution, like usually a Starlink satellite dish. And we can extend that connectivity to the villages that got infrastructure destroyed 10, 15 kilometers away. And we're helping bomb shelters, clinics, and all the civil society institutions to stay connected during a very hard time. So part of the message here is, if you're creating something like that, it should be a long-term engagement. It literally took me close to 10 years to have something that I can say I'm very proud of, that can scale. We have now lessons that we can share with others. We can support them in terms of this is how it works, and this is how it actually gets used in the field. But it was a very long journey, right? And I would say that the other really important element, other than what we're doing in Ukraine and future projects that may come our way, one thing that was really, really interesting is that once you learn how to run nonprofits in a country, in my case, Switzerland, could be somewhere else, you can help others, like establish the presence. In my case, it was the establishment of other nonprofits. So I'm on a board of 5 in total. I'm mainly talking about you today. And it would have been much harder for me to create Wisdom Accelerator without the previous experience, right? So the idea that you can follow a passion, in this case, honoring the memory of my father after he passed, and then finding challenges. So the original concept was really difficult to implement because you're working with governments and it's hard for nonprofits to have the scale to do this. But also understanding that you can pause this and then focus on something else. And then once the opportunity arrives, you can quickly reestablish the original plan adapted to the new realities. So what actually ended up happening is that I started with Broadlight, so telecommunications. Then I had the opportunity to create this nonprofit, Making Teenagers Wiser. I leveraged lots of skills that I had learned. And then once the Ukrainian conflict that actually has been going on since 2014, but once you had the last year escalation taking place, I could very quickly get results done, right? So the message here is be very patient, have a long-term commitment, and be adaptable, right? So what you're learning along the journey is probably going to be helping you in ways that you cannot conceive right now because the future hasn't arrived yet. But those skills can be adapted, and if not for yourself, you can definitely gift your knowledge to others that will need that to achieve their own purpose. But focusing on the topic of the session today, I would like to tell a different story, right? I am originally from Brazil. I have been in Europe for a very long time, and I have a daughter who I grew up in Copenhagen. I am based in Switzerland most of the time, and it was quite challenging because I would try to go there every month and a half, every 2 months, but she could only speak Danish, right? And my Danish is really, really bad because it's a pretty challenging language. If you ever heard someone speaking Danish, you understand what I mean. And the big kind of inflection point, right, when I realized that our relationship as a father and also could move on to a next level was when she called me. I think she was around 10 and a half, maybe 11. And she basically said, "Hello, Daddy," in English. And from that point in time, we pretty much switched to English, right? She had a lot of passive vocabulary from watching the TV shows that happen to be in English. The audio is in English in Denmark. They have subtitles there instead of dubbing. And her cousin from Brazil spent a few months in Copenhagen. One of them could only speak Portuguese. The other one could only speak Danish. After a few months, both of them could speak English because that's how two girls that love each other very much learn to communicate. So my daughter went from zero English to kind of fluent within months, right? Which is amazing. So again, the point of being patient is that you need to give children enough time because they kind of only have one brain and have to focus on learning how to crawl, to walk, to talk. And all of those cognitive processes are very challenging by themselves, right? So now we're used to doing all of those things at the same time without even thinking about it. But it took us years to get here. And the message that I'd like to share with you is like, it can be really fast, right? If you're a parent and you realize, wow, what happened? And in my case, especially because I would only see her every couple of weeks or so, it was even more impressive. But being impressed is one thing, the call to action, like what do you do with this new opportunity is another. And what I decided at that point in time, and it's quite spontaneous, but I did that for 7 years, was that I was going to have an absolutely unforgettable experience with her, a journey together, at least once a year. Like still meeting several times a year and the ice cream and going to the amusement park and everything else, but we would have to have at least one experience that would be truly unique. And the concept there was linked to the fact that I could not be with her all the time, so make the time count, right? That would be very intense because I did not have the extensity of living with her every day. And that worked out pretty well because she started doing some really interesting things at a very young age. And when she was 12, we went to Brazil and went everywhere. My mom's family is from the jungle, from the Amazon, and we went there to the middle of the jungle to visit the Indian tribes and understand their customs and see the rubber plantations, because this is what my grandfather was doing back in the day. So I wanted her to be connected to the history of the family. We spent some time in Rio. And then we went to a place that is a little bit like Everglades in the US, but is probably 200 times bigger. It's called the Pantanal. It's between Brazil, Paraguay, and Bolivia. And you can do safaris during the day, at night, and it's so much fun, etc. But they also have one of the biggest karstic caves in the world that you can visit safely. And those are the giant one, the stalactites and stalagmites. And this one happens to be 150 meters, so yards, I guess, for US folks out there. Half of it is flooded, but it basically means that because the only access point is from the very top, to reach the underground lake, you have to hang from a piece of rope that is located at the equivalent of a 15-story high building. And I grew up as a rock climber. That was my main sport in Rio. So mountaineering is just easier than rock climbing. But I started from being super fit. I was at competition level. So I was very comfortable with the concept of hanging from a 15-story high building. I was less sure about my 12-year-old daughter, and how she was going to face the challenge. And this is so interesting because most people just assume that they can't, so there's no safety concerns. What's the mom going to say? I decided to give her a vote, right? Saying, look, this is what it looks like. It's really stunning. It's such a beautiful location. She saw the pictures. We managed to get the last two seats. So we did the training for the equipment that I was familiar with, but she was not. And then she was all excited because the trip had been so amazing up to that point in time. So she was just expecting more of the same. But when we arrived at the location and she looked at the hole in the bottom of the cave, she was like, "You must be joking. You expect me to go down there?" And that was a really, really interesting moment, right? Because she crossed her arms and was like, "No way, what are you thinking," and etc. And I could have said, "Fine, well, let's just pack and leave, missed opportunity, at least I tried." But instead, I tried to have a logical argumentation, basically saying, "Look, these are the facts, right? You've seen the pictures, you know what it is, you know it's great, feedback's fantastic, you've done the training. This is really, really far. It's very hard to come here. It's also very expensive, so it will be difficult for you to afford this if you want to come here alone." And everything else that I could put on the table, saying these are the elements that you should take into consideration before making your decision. But it's your decision. I'm not going to force it to go down there. And slowly she was uncrossing her arm, becoming a little bit more relaxed. We're like, "Yep, you have a fair point here, here, and there." And eventually I could read her t-shirt that basically said, "Never give up." And I was joking, saying, "No, at least change the t-shirt if you're not getting into the cave." And then she got really angry. And the anger was overriding the little fear that was left. And she got into the mode of, "I'm going to show you," which is exactly where I wanted her to go, right? So she went down with me, and the local guide was a little bit nervous, but everything is super safe. They've been doing this for 20 years. And when she got to the bottom of the cave, right where the lake is, she had this gigantic piano smile. I didn't even realize she had that many teeth in her mouth because she was so proud of herself. And I was proud of her. And she had so much fun and swimming with the stalactites and stalagmites and everything else. Wonderful. And then because she was so young, they just hoisted her out of the cave. So it was actually quite easy for her to get out. I had to do 1,500 pull-ups to get myself out of that cave. And the lesson learned was not only so much fun, so beautiful, great, wonderful pictures. It was that she is really brave. Like, when given the opportunities with the right elements, as a 12-year-old girl, and she was quite small for her age, she looked like she was 10, maybe 9, but she was perfectly capable of doing something that 99% of humans would refuse to do. Like, it's not trivial. It was easier for me because I'm a rock climber, but I was very impressed at her ability to do something that triggers strong emotions. So we kept on traveling around, doing the small trips, and then the big trip a year later was this SpaceX rocket launch. Was there as a VIP guest and met so many interesting people, scientists and everything else. And then a year later was via the United Nations Connections, orchestrating a whole event for the government of Oman. And I was inviting all the speakers, and I was curating all the panels, and basically covering all the subject areas that they wanted to discuss. And there was this panel called the Blockchain and Future Opportunities. And I had already asked the other 25 speakers to join too many panels. So I was a bit concerned in terms of let's not abuse, because these are very senior, very important people who took the time to go to Oman. So future opportunities, wouldn't that be interesting to have a teenager reading a speech about blockchain technologies and children? Like, that's very memorable. So it is something valuable to the event itself. And I knew that she would not like the idea because she's quite shy, but I knew that she would be very good at doing it because I had seen her operating under duress, right? The cave experience. And when given the right set of reasons, she made a decision that made her a better person. She became wiser, right? With the cave and hopefully during the event in Muscat. And it was quite complicated because I was invited by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I had to convince them as well that it was a good idea. But I thought that it would be good to prepare her. Like, of course, she was there with me, helping out and looking at how we organize a big event. There are 22 ministers in total, like 80% of the cabinet was involved, 800 VIP guests. I mean, it was massive. One of probably still today the biggest event ever organized in Oman, from what I was told, right? This is a very large scale. And she was paying attention to all of that, and was making sure that she would go to the stage and sit in the speaker's chair. And this is all so much fun because it's during the break. At the end of the first day, I got the green light from the Minister of Foreign Affairs to invite her formally. I know the government of Oman is inviting my 14-year-old daughter to read a speech about blockchain and children. And it was really funny because that happened quite late in the day. So I went back to the room. I told her, you've been officially invited to be a speaker tomorrow morning. And the morning after, she woke up and told me, Daddy, I had this horrible nightmare that you're going to put me on stage. Like, that was not a nightmare. You're officially invited to speak in front of 800 people. You don't have to, right? The panel can go on and no one is going to know that you were invited, but didn't go. But I kept on stacking all of those logical arguments. This is a great opportunity, such a great skill to have. You're going to be helping children in this country. You literally lobbying their parents to pay attention to this, not only blockchain, but other technologies as well. Because as a young girl, in the Middle Eastern country, representing children, right? Teenagers from all around the world, especially those in Oman that could benefit from this message. And she did it. And it was fantastic. And she did it quite well for a first opportunity as a public speaker. And everybody loved it. So I was like, okay, this is really great, right? And that's when I started having this idea, like, she can benefit from me organizing those big events and the connections that I have with the United Nations, with the World Economic Forum. But what about other children, right? They don't have this kind of access. And one thing that I neglected to mention is that a few months before, she had sent me a message asking if she could come to Davos one day with me. And this is one of the reasons why I started thinking about getting her involved with public speaking in Oman. I didn't want her to go to Davos during the World Economic Forum as my handbag. Just now I'm walking around and she's with me. I wanted her to earn, to belong, to deserve to be there. And she did, right? Thanks to Mariam Azam from Lauter Institutes, who had the idea. In fact, this is totally Mariam's idea, to get my daughter to speak at the panel that Mariam was hosting. And because she had done so well at the event in Oman, I knew I could recommend her, saying, look, that was very positive. Everybody enjoyed the experience. And of course, it was hard for her, but it gets easier over time. So then again, she became wiser in Oman. She became wiser in Davos, right? When she was a speaker at another blockchain event. And she, being Danish, was there 1 year before Greta Thunberg, right? So it's quite funny because all my Danish friends, they love it that she was there before the Swedish girl. But the point being, teenagers have a voice. They need to be prepared, right? They can just be expected to be able to do these kind of things without a series of steps that will happen over several months, if not years. But there is a journey that can be accelerated, right? The Wisdom Accelerator for Youth idea is each one of them is going to have a journey, but how can we make them get faster to where they want to go? They get to choose, they get to define the directions out of many options that are given, but we want to make sure that they get there faster so that they can become wiser to make better decisions for all of us from a societal standpoint, especially down the line. I mean, it's great if you can get a 100-year-old person to become wiser. It's just that that person is not going to be using the wisdom as much as someone who becomes wiser when they're 15, right? So the idea of the Wisdom Accelerator is pretty much, how can I scale her experience, all of those crazy, interesting trips that we did together, adapt it so that teenagers anywhere around the world could benefit from the acceleration process. Not all of them are going to come to Davos. I mean, she did an internship at CERN, right? So the nuclear fusion facility that you have in Geneva. You cannot fit 1 billion teenagers at CERN, right? She was lucky to have the connections and to qualify, but there are lots of alternative experiences that can be done in all countries in the world, regardless of the religion, the cultural background. They can become wiser faster based on their environment. But if no one facilitates that access, it will take them longer. So how can I accelerate that? And the idea of creating this school on the top of a mountain during the World Economic Forum. It sounds completely insane because it is, but who did it, right? So you start figuring out, okay, the end goal is to bring teenagers to Davos so that they can meet the people who are here, guests of the World Economic Forum. They're super interesting for one reason or another. And I want to make sure that I have a chance to talk to teenagers from all around the world. I mean, we had 16 families in the 2 years that we hosted in Davos. They came from 12 different countries in one of the years, right? So it was very mixed. And they had to come with mom or dad because they're all between 13 and 17. They, probably had lots of specific experiences when it comes to how we grow up in their country, in their culture. But they also had the chance to meet kids from the other side of the planet and exchange notes saying, oh, this is what we do when we leave school. I can walk to my house, and others will say that's too dangerous for me to walk to my house. I have to take a bus, and my parents come to pick me up. So they had the whole week to become fast friends, right? The joke is that I wanted them at the end of the week to become childhood friends, like to feel like they've known each other for a very long time, so that they can have those networks starting when they're around 15, so that in 10, 20 years, they can start a company or they can help each other out, and they can definitely be part of each other's lives. And it's very hard to do this, right? Most of the US kids, for instance, they go to summer camp with other American kids, maybe with a few exchange students. But it's an event in which you're taken away from your environment. You're put together with other teenagers that have a similar set of interests and backgrounds, and you get to meet really interesting people. I mean, during the first year, they had a talk with the person who invented internet advertising. He was a CTO of the World Economic Forum, and his talk is fabulous. That was one of the great talks that I had. So they were meeting people who did incredible things with their lives, so that you're changing the baseline, right? Their benchmark of what it means to be cool was like inventing internet advertising is one possibility. It's not like, oh, what whoever in the neighborhood happens to have the biggest car, or is the best at something at the local level. They start getting exposed to a network of people who are the best at the global level, the really best of class worldwide, and they know them personally, right? So this is very motivating to know that you're in touch with these kind of people. And why not? Maybe you can work with them. You'll be inspired. You start studying more specific field of the talk that you just listened because you liked it so much. And there's nothing wrong with becoming an intern and working for that person if they have a company or have an institution somehow. So it's all about the access, right? It's just opening up more opportunities so that they can become wiser faster. And this kind of scale, of course, if you're doing 16 families once a year, reaching out to all the teenagers in the world, it will be very challenging. But curiously, what we had to do during COVID was to completely change the strategy. We wanted to have more events like Singapore, New York. But again, no, they have to be small. They have to be cozy, right? 15, 20 teenagers. If it's too many, it just breaks into small groups. And we don't think that's a good thing. We want to make sure that it's like at a human scale, not an industrial production. And during COVID, what happened is that we didn't have a choice. We had to go online, right? So when you see the website that I have behind me is called neoway.org. It hasn't been updated for a while because we ended up recording 450 podcasts with people, many of them related to the World Economic Forum, like the global shapers and the young global leaders, but also other institutions like Forbes 30 under 30. I was inviting podcast guests who had done interesting things in life and cared about teenagers, right? So we've been inviting 10 people, 8 would connect back, then 5 would say, oh, love the idea, let's discuss, and then 1 or 2 would speak. But I was inviting thousands, which is how I ended up having 450 in total. And those talks were gender balanced by design, right? It was roughly 50-50 men, women. I had 112 countries represented. And we covered all topics, right? Because I was inviting people of interesting backgrounds that had been curated by institutions such as the World Economic Forum or Forbes and a few more, so that I knew that they were a safe quantity. I didn't have to interview them or spend a lot of time with each one of them to understand that they would be, in the vast majority of cases, good speakers. I had a couple of surprises. Like there was this Canadian speaker who could not speak English very well. Like it's a French Canadian, and it's like he was okay at the end, but I did not realize I was going to struggle with the language, considering that 85% of Canada speaks English. I had positive surprises as well. I had some speakers from Liberia who were on video. The quality of the video was absolutely awful, but it was good enough. Like, you could have them joining the conversation. And we basically put a pause in terms of the podcasts that we're recording, because it takes a lot of time. So during COVID, I could do that from home in a similar setting that I have right now, with the same background, by the way. I recycled it from the session recordings that I had back then. And we created a YouTube channel that has more than 100 of those talks published. I can mention here, like if you like to go and check, there's a shortcut, is a website that is tiny, like really small, .cc. So TINY.cc /neotube, like NEOTUBE. So tiny.cc/neotube. And they're going to see the work I did during the COVID pandemic. Right. So it's another message worth sharing, in the sense of, look, COVID happened. What can you do? How can you create value with the food that is left in the fridge, right? How can I cook with that? And it turned out to be great, because it had been really impossible for me to have 112 countries represented, because these people will not come to Davos, right? It's very, very hard to get there in the first place. So we invite people who happen to be around. But all of a sudden now, COVID allowed us to have a truly global conversation. And in terms of what has happened, it's great. So this is sort of mid 2021, very happy with the results. But then what happened at that point in time was even more interesting, because one of the ideas, the same way that I use the original nonprofits, and how does it work, nonprofit law, how do you open a bank account, your advisors, and who else needs to be involved. And it was so much easier for me to create the Wisdom Accelerator concept, which is basically a school that only exists for 1 week on the top of a mountain. I branched out to the Wisdom House, which was a space for nonprofits to have a voice during a week in which everything is really expensive. Like Davos is in Switzerland, it starts at expensive, but during the WEF week, it's incredible. Like the prices that people charge is just insane. So I created a Wisdom House based on the Wisdom Accelerator concept, but instead of helping teenagers, I was helping nonprofits and social enterprises, right? And that was very successful the first year, because I started from a few steps up based on what I had done before. And we had the Wisdom House again this year, and it was enormous. I had 5,000 feet of space in the most expensive city in the world for the whole week. And nonprofits could come. Our model, curiously, it's based on the Naples in Italy. They have a tradition called Caffè Sospeso, in which someone who's having a good day would get into a bar and buy 2 coffees. They drink one, and they leave the second one suspended, hanging there for someone who's having a bad day, right? So if you need a free coffee, you show up at the bar, you can ask, do you have any Caffè Sospeso? And you get a coffee for free if they have one. So our version of that was that if you want to use the Wisdom House, which is basically free space in a very expensive city during a major, very prestigious event, but if you want to use it, just bring enough healthy food and drinks for yourself and another person, the other person being the residents of Davos, right? We've been going there for 50 years now, and it's a mess. It's really disruptive for the residents. So this is a way that I found, based on my experiences with the Wisdom Accelerator, to say thank you to the residents of Davos, saying, look, you can also benefit from having the World Economic Forum here. We had lots of really interesting sessions, and they can have food and drinks for free. And Then again, because I had that experience that I could only pull off because I had previous experiences that were building slowly towards something bigger, I could be given 5,000 square feet, 500 square meters of space the whole week by the city of Davos because I had a track record, right? I could show to them, look, I did this in 2020. It was very successful here. There's a feedback that we got from the residents. These are the sessions that we had. And this is a really nice progression in terms of how do you get to the something really big? It's like start with something small that scales, right? And this is what I've been focusing on. And the idea, because you mentioned my interest in film, if I have a wisdom accelerator for teenagers and I have a wisdom house for the startups and social enterprises, why not a wisdom film festival? There's a cinema in Davos, and the wisdom is not a topic that gets discussed often enough. So I created this concept in which no one has a lot of time during the World Economic Forum, but they have enough time to watch a 15-minute TED Talk, right? But they can watch that TED Talk anywhere, anytime. They're public and free for all. But if I can have the TED Talk being screened, and then I have a Zoom call with the person who gave that TED Talk 5 years ago, and the speaker will be explaining, this is what I've been doing over the last 5 years. Now that's really interesting, because not only you get the knowledge from the TED Talk, you get a refresher and an opportunity to interact with the speaker. So that's the Wisdom Film Festival that was also born out of all the things that had done before. And the last jump, which is kind of curious, that if I've done a film festival twice in Davos during the World Economic Forum, and I happen to be the chairman of the Explorers Club in Switzerland, and there are no exploration film festival in the world outside of France. That's the only one I could find. And it's all in French, only French participants. Like, okay, I know how to do film festivals. I have a lot of experience with Cannes and with the industry. Let me create an exploration film festival, which is going to happen in October, right? So the message here is that the journey is long, is an arc of almost 10 years, like from having the idea of doing something related to nonprofit activities to understanding where the niches are, leveraging lessons learned, getting those blocks together, getting people involved. Sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't, and you just don't get involved with that anymore. With others, you go like, wow, no, I want to do something even bigger with these people because they're so amazing. And Miriam is definitely one of them who introduced me to you to get invited to come here today. And you can start sharing the opportunities with a lot of clarity, right? So when we had the Wisdom House last month in Davos, I needed staff. I could just get a 25-year-old and then say, look, this is a volunteer position. You can put on your CV that you helped during the WEF, etc. Instead, I got a 14-year-old and I nominated her the general manager of the Wisdom House. And she was there alone for around a third of the time during the week doing an internship. Like a 14-year-old was the key representative. When people walked in, she had all the answers. And that was amazing. She was flawless. Like, there's absolutely zero criticism in terms of what she did because she was that good. And now, because she had this work experience at a very prestigious location, we're trying to get her a formal internship in Germany, where she comes from, with a big venture capital company, right? So she can be exposed to all of those portfolio opportunities and evaluating investments and everything else. How many 14-year-old girls in the world actually have what it takes to be proposed to a VC company with a track record? Because now she has that, right? So the whole journey, my daughter had that experience because she has a crazy dad who travels around a lot and knows lots of people. But now it scales nicely, right? Because when I'm organizing those events, I can have lots of teenagers helping out as interns. And because I have close to 500 speakers in total, I can ask my speakers from the online events, would you like to have a trainee who is awesome, right? Was recommended by someone, came to one of our events, and all of a sudden you can have teenagers, regardless of where they are in the world, doing an internship with artificial intelligence company in San Francisco, with a green hydrogen company in Berlin. And that's real work. Like, they're working from home with mom or dad being the supervisors, but they sign a contract that goes onto their CV that is going to suit them well for the university application form. And it's something that scales wonderfully because they're working from home. Like if they have what it takes, we want to help them have the wisdom accelerated and to create this journey, right? My journey has been almost 10 years so far.
Thank you very, very much, Marcelo. It's for a very, very interesting presentation, starting with honoring your father and ending up learning that is the children's capacity to absorb quality information and quickly make a decision if you give them a choice from the age of 10, since abstract thinking begins at 9. So I just wanted to congratulate you on all of your work. I just wanted to mention that Susie Halleck has been our UN intern, and I started the internship program in 1992 at the United Nations. So over to you, Susie.
Thank you, Dr. Durbak, and thank you so much, Marcelo, for such an interesting presentation. We have a ton of questions from the audience, so we'll go through those now. Since you're the founder of a nonprofit that aims to help teenagers around the world become wiser faster, can you provide some tips for teenagers to develop in the field of learning and self-realization?
Yeah, I think that optionality is a beautiful word that people don't use that often. So you need to find your passion and purpose, but it's easier said than done, right? So one of the metaphors that I use with the Wisdom Accelerator is like going to a Spanish tapas restaurant. You have little bites of lots of different things, and you may like the cheese, but oh, the tortilla is just so much nicer, right? So they may like medicine, but they are better aligned with engineering, but they tasted both, right? So when I'm having those sessions, they're talking with people or listening to the podcast, like a doctor from Myanmar or a scientist from Palo Alto, they should find a frequency that resonates really well, right? So it comes from exposure to curated quality content and conversations, which is what we're trying to do. And then the ability to engage, right? So what's the point of being told that there's a place called the Explorers Club with 3,500 members and fellows who focus on field science? And exploration is different from adventure because when you're exploring, you're producing science, or you're supporting the work of scientists. But if you're 14 and you love the idea of becoming an explorer, but you're told, oh, no, you have to be 18 to join, that is very frustrating. It's not the case, though. Like if you go to the Explorers Club, you have the next generation program. So there are many ways for them to get engaged from the age of 10. And I know the person who was leading the program from the very beginning is a good friend of mine. And so you want to make sure that you trigger that passion, and then there's an immediate opportunity for them to get engaged. They have to earn it, right? You cannot gift it to them saying, here's a silver platter, and I have more silver platters if you don't like that one. You're just spoiling them in this case. But telling them the key to that door is on the table. You have to pick it up. You have to walk over there. You have to open the door. I have to have a look inside. And the one thing I can tell you is that that door is really interesting, right? But they have to do most of the work. And let's say the combination of allowing them to understand what is the realm of possibilities and then giving them a chance to get involved. And every person has a different answer.
Thank you. That was very helpful. You talked about this already, but one of the audience members asked if you don't mind repeating what really inspired you to start your nonprofit organization.
Well, the very first one was honoring the memory of my family. Like it just felt like it was the right thing to do, because I inherited a few flats in Rio during the Olympic game phase, so they were overvalued. I thought, how interesting, right? And I've never done anything to deserve this. So how can I give it back to society in a way that is enjoyable for me as well, but is also hyper efficient? And establishing a nonprofit structure in which I self-funded for 6-7 years. And then I started needing to create activities that people are willing to pay for. Like the Wisdom Accelerator is not free, but it's a nonprofit activity, right? It is as cheap as it can be for what it is. And the initial trigger was definitely family related. Both of them, I would say. The first one is the passing of my father. The second one is my daughter doing crazy, interesting things. It's like, oh, how can I adapt that to as many teenagers as possible?
Thank you. The next question is, what qualities should young people have in order to be qualified for your program? Do you have any sort of
Oh, it's at this point in time is referral only.
qualifications?
Yeah, so the idea now, because in Davos it was only twice that we managed to host it. It's very complicated to do it, and it's very limited in space. So the idea is that they ideally would have done something that make people go like, say what? Say, you did what? There was a kid from Israel that became Forbes 30 under 30 when he was 14 years old, because he started coding apps when he was 10, right? So you have special skills and he could actually deliver. And this is really interesting because I know that whatever he's doing now can be accelerated through the connections that you find in Davos. There was another kid that was the second youngest person ever to pass the University of Cambridge a math admissions exam. He was 9 years old. And I'm giving those three examples to say that they're also welcome. I mean, they're not the focal group. Like, we're not only looking for the super geniuses with amazing skills, because both of them had severe personal issues. Like, they had no friends, or they had to sleep with the father next to them. I mean, I like having those very narrow overachievers because they benefit from the program and they can share a lot with the others. But the mix tends to be how much work are they willing to put in. Like, they have to go through an interview, they have to show the commitment. I had some teenagers writing letters saying, this is what I'm going to do after I come back from your program, without being prompted. It's not like, I was saying you have to write a letter. It's like, no, that teenager had the initiative saying, it is probably relevant to the person who's hosting this kind of events to know what I'm going to be doing with the wisdom that I've acquired, and the fact that I'll be sharing with others. And she was right. Like, that was definitely a very smart move. And it tends to be people in my trust circle. It could be the WEF, UN, I mean, this group here, for instance, saying, I know a great kid for your program. So I need basically to have adults that understand what I'm trying to do, which is why I love giving these talks. And they go like, yeah, I have a teenager that's absolutely perfect. And then we have a conversation, and depending on what we're doing, because we also want to make sure it's gender balance, right? So maybe you have too many girls, maybe you have too many boys. But yeah, it starts with the application. It starts with really wanting to do this.
Thank you. What is the most interesting aspect of your work?
Well, curiosity for sure. I guess if I have an addiction is being too curious. I have the lives of a cat, so I'm hoping that I'll have them lasting much longer. And there's this legacy element, right? Saying, why are we here? Saying, not here during this phone call. It's like, why do we exist? What is our purpose in society? I'm not here to talk about the meaning of life, but I try to make my life meaningful. So when I am achieving something really surprising, like, wow, the Wisdom House in Davos this year was phenomenal. Like, it was twice the size of the previous one. I had big names like the BMW Foundation sponsoring it out of nowhere, just because I came up with an idea that people were willing to support. I managed to get an incredible outcomes. I mean, the best story is when a friend of mine in the middle of the WEF week sends me a message saying, I'm here with will.i.am, the singer, composer from Black Eyed Peas, and we need a private place to have a dinner with 10 of his friends. Like, I could set up something that would have the functions of a restaurant in the location where we're having Wisdom House, which is a school theater, right? So I had 1 hour to build a restaurant for will.i.am and his 10 friends. It took me 55 minutes. So this is very fulfilling because we stay there until 2 in the morning. You worked out really, really well. And it was, ridiculous that I could create a restaurant in 1 hour. And yet we had the raclette, we had cold cuts, we had 15 different types of soup. Because though the supermarket is nearby, I just went there, got everything I needed, bought a microwave and everything else. This is very fulfilling. Like the magic that happens from having those elements in place and being proposed specific challenge, say, yeah, I'll go for it, and then succeeding. This is definitely my favorite answer, say, to this question.
So interesting. What is the most difficult part of your work?
Scaling and finding people that will be there for the long term, because it's very time consuming to create an ecosystem. Like, you've been involved with WIT for a long time, so you're a known quantity, you know what's expected. But when you're trying to get new volunteers on board, many volunteers are quite fickle, right? So they are very well intentioned, but they're not a good fit. And you spend a lot of time training them and then they vanish, right? So I had a couple of amazing trainees and amazing volunteers. They were not the majority, right? So the scalability requires a lot of patience, but that's how the game is played. So it's fine by me. Like, I know how hard it is, and I deal with it accordingly.
Thanks. Could you describe the level of impact a nonprofit project can have on society?
Well, the term nonprofit is very tricky, right? Because you have private interest nonprofits, and technically, yeah, they are nonprofits, but they're defending the interests of a specific group. And you have public interest nonprofits, right? So you're basically doing something that is good for society. And you would not have society as it is without nonprofits, right? If you eliminate certain institutions, United Nations being the biggest example, but not the only one, the world would be a very sad and dark place, right? So how do you quantify and qualify light and happiness and freedom and longevity with the good health? I won't even try to put a dollar value to it, but I believe that we're better as a society because certain people decide to spend their time instead of doing something else that would be more focused on their own selfish interests. And thankfully, our biochemistry generates dopamine when we do something like that, right? So we are being rewarded by our own chemistry when you're doing something good, nonprofit. But the dry technical answer is KPIs. It's like how many liters of clean water have been distributed by Charity Water? How many new water wells are being dug, and how are they being monitored? So there are lots of reports, especially from the biggest nonprofits, and those reports are going to give a very specific, precise value on the return of investment of the dollars that have been deployed. So I suggest looking at those.
Do you have any advice on how teenagers can find the motivation for self-development, to care about the future and join an organization like WAY? Specifically, one asked about how to alleviate the fear that often comes with trying something new for yourself.
Well, you have comfort zones, right? So what we're trying to do here is just making that comfort zone huge, like they're comfortable in any situation, like you have the fortitude and resilience and tenacity. It's not binary. It's not like you flick a switch and all of a sudden you have fortitude. That's not the way it works, right? So it's baby steps. And you want to have exposure to certain elements that would allow you to be more resilient. There are lots of sources. Not all of them are good. Both, I would say most of them are well-intentioned. Sometimes they steal the science, but you need to be able to tell and ask for help if you can tell yourself. But it's quite important. Like when we created this close to 500 podcasts, you can be in your bedroom listening to the architect from Thailand saying, "This is why I became an architect," right? And all of a sudden, it feels like you know that person, And what we do is to create a bridge. So if I have someone sending me a message saying, could you introduce me to that person who gave the talks? Like, sure thing. The LinkedIn profile is literally there with every video. Like, so if you liked what you listened to, there's a very easy way. Like, I think you can create a LinkedIn profile when you're only 16 now. It used to be 13, a bit of a shame. I'm sure it's legal reasons. But you could ask mom or dad to send a LinkedIn message to our speaker and then say, I love your work, you know, I'm gonna have a chat. And you want to make sure that the level of comfort is high enough, because it's very hard when you're trying to get into a new type of activity. I remember when I was 14, I wanted to become a scuba diver. It took me 3 months to have the courage to call the club just to be told that they only take people from 16. So 3 months of anguish and fear of being rejected, and they're like, you don't even qualify, right? So it is very hard. And what we're trying to do is to make sure that they have exposure to concepts and industries and people that could eventually help them get more engaged, right? So I'll say try to learn as much as possible so they can have an intelligent conversation to the extent of a newbie, right? So if you know nothing about sex, or at least you know the key concepts, and don't be afraid to ask, because the vast majority of the adults who spoke at our events, and some of them are actually teenagers, but most are grown-ups, they would love to have that. Like they love the idea of a random teenager genuinely asking for help, and they're like, wow, how can I support you? So there's a lot of love to be asked for and given. It's just not a process that happens as often as it should.
In your opinion, can it ever be too late to start a new occupation?
Not really. Like especially because each occupation is unique, because it's built on top of everything you've done before. So we all, in a way, unique snowflakes, right? Because if you become a doctor at age 80, you're probably not doing that to get a big salary and get the big house and the cat and the dog and the big car. You're doing that because you love medicine, right? So it's never too late. What changes is the why.
Do you have any thoughts on what parents need to do to raise a goal-oriented and wise teenager?
Oh, that's a trick question. I think that you need to define work packages, right? So if you're saying we need to mow the lawn, there's a boundary that this is the grass that should be cut, right? So you want to facilitate the understanding of the problem to be solved, right? So they need to have those smaller wins to feel comfortable with the concept, and then all of a sudden we can say, hey, let's do something much larger. But I think it's really important to give certain tasks that would generate a true sense of achievement. Like if they can do something, like when my daughter ended up in this cave in Brazil, it's like, that was remarkable. Like I did not expect her to do that. I was literally prepared for her to say, let's just drive away, and I will be totally fine with that, because hey, she was 12, and yet she managed to do something remarkable. So you want to give them the training grounds to allow them to understand, like she did train the day before, so she knew how to use equipment and felt safe with it. And then push a little bit, like have a stretch goal. Like, you can ask them to, you could ask them to run a marathon. I'm not saying the marathons are good for kids, definitely not a good idea. But if they aim at running a marathon and they only run half a marathon, they haven't failed, they run half a marathon, right? So having grand ambitious goals, if they have the basic skill set, could be a good idea. But if they feel like they're failures and that prevents them from trying again, definitely not a good idea. So it depends on the child and where they are. If the kids are watching, like if their friends are going to be teasing them at school, so you want to create a safe space for them to experiment. But start with the basic skills and then give them goals that stretch nicely so they can do something really impressive.
Thank you. And do you know why or have any ideas around why teenagers are depressed these days? Like, do you think parents are communicating in the right way?
You're breaking up a bit there, but I think I understood the question. So the kids are not only depressed, they're short-sighted because they don't go outside enough. And I'm desperately concerned about this metaverse thing that is just going to get more screens hanging from their faces. And you need to make sure that you have real life experiences, that you go to the summer camp and you learn physical skills, and you understand the world as it is. And it is very hard to be depressed after you've done a 3-hour hike, because your body is full of all sorts of endorphins and dopamine, and you're sore and you're proud and you're happy, and you just have no time to be depressed. Like one of the best cures, natural cures that I know, is just go out and be in touch with nature and learn new things and share the joy with your friends and your family.
That was a very, very good place to end on. You're absolutely right. You have to give children the opportunity to begin thinking. And as I mentioned to you, abstract thinking begins at about 9. And for some children, it begins not much earlier than that. And it is very important at that time to begin treating them as if they were adults capable of making their own decisions. You give them all the elements and all the consequences, and then you give them the opportunity to make decisions themselves on how they want to handle the situation. And you usually find that if you start giving them the opportunity, rarely do they make very serious mistakes. But your presentation was excellent, and it is wonderful that you are doing something which, as I said, I started in 1992 at the United Nations by forming an internship program for high school students. And that has continued for a long time. And Susie has been in our program for 2 summers. You're moving on with on a much larger scale is just about excellent, because we do need a lot of informed youth to be able to make this planet habitable with all the populations that we have and all the problems that we have. So I wish you the best of luck with your continued endeavor. And Susie, thank you very, very much for monitoring, and have a very, very good week. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.